Hey, welcome back to the Papers Podcast, where the number needed to listen is 1. We scour all of the health professions education journals to find important papers that you should know about, or at least ones that we can argue vociferously about. Today, we're already punchy. Some of us are hungry. I'm craving pumpernickel myself. I don't know why. It's a Christmas kind of a thing. Other people might be gingerbread. But, the crew is here. Lara, how are you?
Hi, everyone. I've tried to figure out why you crave pumpernickel. Like, that's a thing?
Oh, it's a delicious bread. And maybe I also have shares in a pumpernickel bakery. John, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Favorite bread, John? What would it be?
Much like my interests, I think I'm just plain white.
And Linda, you're first up with papers, and I hope you're doing well.
I am, thank you. And at this time of year, it's got to be a panettone and not a pumpernickel. So thanks, everybody. It's good to be here. We are recording this on the last days before winter break, so you'll get it in a new year. And I'm entitling this episode, The 3 M's. Do you depend on your phone? The article is called Media Multitasking in Medical Students, a theory-based approach to understanding this behavior, teaching and learning in medicine. A little bit earlier on in 2023, the authors are Jonathan Mail and colleagues. So let me start by asking each of you in a sentence, no more. Do you depend on your phone? Lara, John, Jason?
Yes. For multitasking, though? Like, is that what you mean?
For anything.
For life.
For life? Oh, yeah. Yes. Like, I just had a meeting a minute ago where I was working with a scholar, and my son, my eldest, texts me. He's like, Mom, I need your email right now. So I text him an email address. And I wrote back, why? He's like, registration. And I'm like, for what? He's like, courses for next year. And I need your signature too. I'm like, send it to me and I'll sign it and I'll send it back. He's like, I need it on a piece of paper. I'm like, right back, literally, I'm so sorry that this is your reality. I got to work, dude.
I feel like we could dox you right now if we asked you for your email and your PIN and a couple other things. You'd immediately...
Yeah, bank account number too, please. Totally. Yeah. John, do you live on your phone?
I can't remember the question. I was too busy playing Candy Crush. I'm not sure what you're asking.
All right. Enough of you, John. Jason, sick as you are.
You know what? Like all of us, I am totally addicted to my phone. It's the first thing I look at in the morning. It's the last thing I look at night, because so many parts of our lives flow through our phones now.
I agree. And so there's a lot of time when we're using our phone, and it's for, as you put it, parts of our lives. And there's other times where we do what John does and we play Candy Crush, which I heard was one of the biggest earning games ever. I heard that recently. Anyway, about this paper, Lara is always reminding us that our education scholarship needs to be grounded in theory. And if you guys haven't figured that out yet, you should listen to our recent episode that Lara did about that as a methods consult. So you might think that I've chosen this paper because it has theory in the title. Actually, I chose it because recently I was chastised for, quote unquote, playing on my phone during a large group meeting, even though I think I was also listening and contributing to this meeting. So I was multitasking and supposedly caught out on it. And that made me think, what's so bad about it? So I found this article. The authors define media multitasking, MM, as a technology used for non-education purposes while engaged in education activities. I love the alternative terms for it, cyber slacking, or to be more polite, digital distraction. So the effect of media multitasking on academic performance is a concern. We know that college students who play around with their phones in class have a negative effect on academic performance, such as grades, attention, recall, use of risky behaviors, and it can even affect the people who sit next to them. So I started to think about why. Because a long time ago, probably a decade ago, John made us think that we cannot multitask. I remember there was an old paper that you reviewed about multitasking. So what I found out was that there's something called cognitive bottlenecking, which is a central process where people are hampered when they try and perform two tasks simultaneously. And also when you introduce a secondary task, the first task has decreased attention. And when you switch between these tasks, there is a latency period where you're concentrating on the first one, even though you're supposed to be looking at the second one. And because of this, the frequency with which students engage in multitasking behavior actually means that it's task switching rather than multitasking. So you can't basically engage on either. So I thought that was some interesting cognitive theory. Before we go on with this paper, any comments on the cognitive aspects of this or on the actual theoretical framework? Jason, John, Lara?
I'd like to comment that I'm totally guilty of that. In fact, while you were talking, we were multitasking. And I can just imagine my kids come home from university and they talk about what they do during a quote unquote lecture. And they're watching YouTube videos, or they're looking at the slides ahead, or they're doing another class. And I think I would be exactly the same. I think I would sit at the back of the class and I'd be doing multiple different kinds of homework to try and get it done. I suspect that all three of you would be doing the same. Maybe not Lara, actually. Lara would probably sit at the front. But the other three of us would probably be sitting at the back, always like multitasking. Am I right?
Yeah, you are right. Although in med school, I was also sitting at the back smoking some questionable substance.
Linda.
Really? Biochemistry. That's why I don't know any.
So hard, though. You're cooler than anybody knows.
I love that you went to school at a time where you could both smoke drugs and also smoke indoors.
Yes, exactly.
That's a time that doesn't, well, it might exist in the future, but anyway. My take on multitasking is rapid task switching is a real phenomenon we need to be very cautious about. But we can multitask if we can automate one of the tasks. And I would make the argument that when you're sitting in lecture experiencing new knowledge, your cognitive load is probably at a maximum. And for you to try to rapid task switch to another task that requires any attention, you'll lose fidelity of that information in the lecture. You can multitask something in the sense of if you want to study and listen to background music where you don't need a cognitive load, yeah, that's no problem. I'll throw in one different mix though, which is that if you're attending to complementary information that is well aligned with the lecturer's presentation. So Meyer has this theory of multimedia learning. In your working memory, you have two parallel tracks. One is for visual and one is for auditory. So you have a visual spatial sketchpad and you have a phonological loop. And so you might be able to hack your working memory if you get a complementary image to balance out what you're hearing your lecturer talk about. But you can't do Candy Crush and you can't do a lecture and imagine you're going to learn equally well. You're going to lose fidelity.
So I'll only add in to compliment that for me, I did sit in the front, but that was because I was at that stage in my life, I was too self-conscious to wear my glasses in class. So,
so
I couldn't see if I sat in the back. So I had to
Does that
sit in
make
the
you
front.
a stylish nerd? Like you're a stylish nerd?
You know,
Yes.
hey,
Yeah.
dude, it is what it is. So I totally did that. One of the things, like when I'm trying to do deep work, when I'm trying to do real thinking, if I'm coding data, if I'm writing, I actually have to turn everything off, and including, how things pop up because, you get texts and whatever. I have to turn all of that off because once I get in there, I need to stay in there in order to do it well, to the point where I used to listen to music when I was writing, because the faster the song, I felt I would type faster. But if there were lyrics in the songs, they would start to show up in my papers. So I can only listen to music that doesn't have lyrics when I'm working. So what does that say about my task switching? I don't know, but yeah.
Always want to know where that paper on theory and sympathy for the devil, which is Rolling Stones lyric, how that all came together.
Right?
But now it all makes sense.
Yeah, we just have to figure out what song it was.
And then you two can join me in that moment. Yeah.
All right. So our authors decided to use the integrative model of behavioral prediction theory, the IMBP theory. And there's a very nice diagram in the paper. It looks at behavior and says behavior relates to intentions. Intentions are influenced by attitudes, normative pressure, behavioral control, and all of those are influenced by various beliefs. And all of those beliefs are influenced by a number of variables such as past behavior, knowledge, culture, and things like that. So now I've just presented very briefly the IMBP. What do you guys think of it? Do you think it might be useful in medical education? Lara, John, Jason.
I'm having a pause, Linda, because I don't want to say that it doesn't have a place. I think that the theory probably does have a place. I think that there are aspects of the theory that probably hold more power or hold more promise for real utility. And that's great. And in terms of behavior prediction, we're now in a theory that's well outside my bandwidth of things that I tend to think about. So this is a little bit uncomfortable for me, especially because I don't know how you guys were managing the paper as you were reading, but I literally had to start using the patented, so yes, you can't do it either without paying me, method of print out the figure and then print out the paper and a finger on the paper and a finger on the figure, trying to figure out what maps to what. Because I found myself, I think it goes backwards. I think they talk about it from behavior. They work the image from the right to the left. And I intuitively, because we are in a Western country which reads left to right, I want to start the figure on the left. So I found myself struggling.
I think you just described academic Twister, the board game. Remember, you have to put a left hand on blue square, right foot on red square, and see if you can still stand at the end of that. I actually really like the figure 1 in this paper, which describes all of this. When I was new to HPE, and not that I've figured it all out, I had this idea that there was some kind of hierarchy of theory, or there's a perfect fit, or there's one theory to rule them all. And that's not the case. We really choose theory based on, does it well represent, describe, or inform the data or the analysis we're trying to use. This is a theory that comes from outside of the theories I would know, so it's helpful for me. It's fairly reductionistic and fair, or at least the way it's presented in this paper. And I'll confess that I didn't look past this paper to go back to the source material. It tries to compartmentalize a lot of things, which I think overlap. But if you want to deconstruct what are all the contextual and social elements to consider as a function of how an individual might behave, I think you can kind of get there. But I don't necessarily think that it's a theory that I might adopt in the future.
I'll pile on. There are lots of theories of health behaviors, or for that matter, any behaviors. And this is one that has some multiple facets to it. I wasn't particularly enamored with it. And as we'll soon hopefully discuss, I felt like it was flogged in this paper, but we'll see what everybody else thinks. There's a little foreshadowing.
Well, I have to agree with you. It looks very nice in a diagram and makes sense. But we'll see how it actually acts up in the paper. So let's go back. What the authors want to do was look at the effects of media multitasking in medical students, in particular to quantify the extent of MM among a cohort of first and second year med students in one school, explore the factors that are associated with their extent of MM in class, whether participating in person or online, and explore the relationships between reported MM and academic performance. And they use the IBMP to analyze those course and cognitive factors. They did have a series of hypotheses, which I'm not going to read to you, but it's nice because very often we don't see hypotheses in paper. So I think that was a positive point. What they did, and I'm going to be really brief with the methods and the results, and then I think we can get to the meat of this, was that they developed a survey where the questions reflected the IMBP theory. And they, in the survey, they also wanted to quantify MM behaviors and elicit those behavioral, normative, and control beliefs that the students had. They also linked multitasking behavior with both average and block grades to see if there was any link with academic impact on the behavior. And they used a whole bunch of descriptive and bivariate and multivariate stats. Unless people have very specific comments on the methods, yes, John does, of course, because it's got something to do with numbers. Go ahead, John.
Yay, numbers. There's one thing that kind of bugged me before I jump into numbers. I just want to flag. They make a statement that says, this is the first time ever this theory has been used, and then a qualifier in medical students, and then another qualifier in studies.
On a Friday.
And I've got to say, that's one of those things that really bug me when I hear it, the first time ever, as if doing it first gives meaning and justification for why you're doing this study at all. And that's, I think, a bit of a fallacious argument. It's like saying pumpernickel is the only bread you should ever eat when there's other good challah and, pita and other good types of sources of grain. So be careful about doing that. I'll confess that I've done that before until I realized it was a weak argument for the research I was trying to do. They really lost me in the methods. Like, man, did they ever spend a lot of time working me through the survey, which they have as a supplement, but I didn't have the energy in it for me to go to the actual supplement and look at the survey. So I have not a lot of comments to say about it. But they jumped across some of the stats that were much more interesting to me, which was what kind of factor analysis are they doing? They have this table 1, which is part of the results, but there is no description of how they did their factor analysis. And me, I love myself a good factor analysis, how they're just putting it together. They had a whole ton of linear regressions to try to find correlations between it. But then they don't do some of the important methodology things that, because they have so many comparisons, there's a problem, because what they're really basically doing is they're interrogating the data, perhaps blindly, to see, can we see some kind of correlation? And I'm going to come back to that later, but you can't just do that, because guess what happens? Chance. You get enough questions, you ask it enough questions, you ask it enough analysis, eventually you're going to see some kind of signal. Is that a true signal, or is that just chance? And so I would flag that as two things that make me say, I'm not sure if I can believe the results yet, but I'll come back to some of the results at the next part.
Jason?
I want to jump on that train. I found this to be a candidate for convoluted paper of the year. It's a survey. I've never seen it. John said they interrogated the data. I think they waterboarded the data. Like, it just goes on and on and on. It was such a painful method section. Like, I think any clinician educator would honestly need an SSRI by the time they're done reading this paper. And also, it's a survey. I've never seen just let me finish. I've never seen a survey have such a convoluted analysis. They're throwing items out. They're combining items. They're doing several different kinds of analyses that I can't even pronounce. I've never seen a paper like this. And then they justify it all by saying it's an important topic and we have a theory. That was very frustrating read, I have to say.
Well, I got to say, I agree with you both, but for those who can't see the video, I am making the gesture of fishing. I truly think this may not be single line fishing. This may be casting a very wide net and doing it over and over again. Lara, I know it's not your bailiwick. Is that a big word like pumpernickel?
Not really as long, but yeah, no. And that's my challenge with this paper is that because I'm not a quantitative scholar, because I don't work with statistics often. Let's replace often with the word ever. I honestly, while I conceptually understand what they did and why they did things, I don't actually understand the methods. And I find that a little troubling, because it's not like I'm a disinterested reader. I'm a very interested reader. And so I find it challenging. I find it a little hard when I get these kinds of manuscripts, and it's so very difficult for me to access it. And I guess part of the reason is that I often find myself writing these extra paragraphs and supplementary materials for my manuscripts when I'm using a qualitative method and the editors ask for, can you provide some education?
That's
and I'm
fair.
always happy to do that. I'm happy to provide education. I would love some education around some of these methods choices, because I would be a better scholar if they would teach me a little bit about some of their methods decisions.
That's so fair.
Here.
That's a really good comment. There's very little explanation because it assumes the audience just does factor analysis for breakfast.
But
And I'm
mind
not
you,
sure it's done appropriately here.
yeah, teaching and learning in medicine does tend to, at least in the past, has done some of these stats-heavy type of papers. So I'm not surprised that it's in here. All right, let's move on. I think we're all agreeing that there is some, to put it mildly, murkiness in the methodology. So maybe RMM will be murky methodology as opposed to media multitasking. So what did they find? Before they interrogated the data, they interrogated 305 students, giving them the survey. They got 119 complete responses. A couple of interesting things. Media multitasking did not seem to be related to grades. This is a pretty gross measurement because I'm not quite sure how they linked media multitasking with grades, because they did it on a block basis, on a course basis, not an individual basis, as far as I can tell. And the other thing is it was based on reported behaviors. Then they did all of this multivariate stuff. And what seemed to come out as interesting, the thing that was most interesting to me anyway, was students continued to, or did media multitasking because they were concerned about being bored. That was the major cognitive belief that actually ended up driving a lot of this. I'm not going to say much more about the methods because I can see you all chomping at the bit there. Lara, Jason, Sean.
Like these are quant methods, and so I don't care.
I want to just pick up on one of John's critiques, which is that if they do enough comparisons, I think there's like 100 comparisons in here, they're going to find something that correlates. And it wasn't their hypotheses about media multitasking, which I think is an important topic. They convinced me it was an important topic. And so they found one comparison, which was, I'm worried about being bored, and that's why I'm motivated by it, according to this theory. I mean, it's just not very compelling. Everything else didn't fall out. And I wonder how to interpret the results, given their logic is, I'm going to look at this test score from a pre-clerkship block, and I'm going to retroactively survey somebody and ask them what they were doing last month on their phone during a lecture. Like that's the premise is so thin. I'm not sure you can interpret any of these results.
So they try to see what elements of their theory will lead to the behaviors. And so that's table 3 and then table 5. In table 3, they have about 10, I'm just eyeballing this, 10, 15 different ideas or elements. And they show correlations that are modest at best, like around 0.2. But they have so many, they don't do what's called a Bonferroni correction, which if you want to look that up.
Bonferroni, he's a good friend of mine.
It's nothing magical, except I wish I had an Italian name like Bonferroni, which says you set your marker of significance, you set it higher if you ask the data a question a whole bunch of times, because you want to make the likelihood of chance really, really, really less likely by saying, you know what, we got to change what our alpha looks like. And so, you know what, I just eyeballing this, I don't think they actually, if they did a Bonferroni correction, I don't think they have anything that's significant, even though they said like almost all 10 or 15 of these questions they asked show something. So I'm not sure if they actually, the theory is pointing out what the behaviors lead to. And then they have this factor analysis. I'm just trying to pull up the table, which was table 1, which is really weird. It's actually listed, I'm not sure why they did it, in the methods section, but not in the results section. So it's kind of weird out of order. And they have all these factors. And so just a reminder that when you do a factor analysis, you try to take all the variables that you have and say, hey, do they start to nest around or link to one another? You try to see where all the correlations hold together. And is there some nesting so that you can take 20 ideas and condense them down to 3 or 4? And they do that. And here's the other tell. They have what I think is a Cronbach's alpha for one of their factors of 0.94. I'm not sure if it is. They don't tell me what stat they're doing. But whenever you see a reliability that high, you know the game is rigged. You know almost that that something is rigged there. Like in real life, it should never be that good. That's almost perfect. And there's no such thing as perfect in research. And so when you see such a good score, that always is the red flag for me is, something's happening here. But then you read the questions, it says, our factor is, if I don't multitask, I'll do better in school. And then they ask the question, and here are the things that group around that. Would you perform better in class? Would you get a better grade? Would you perform better on the exam? Like, those are all the same questions. That's like they took a thesaurus and asked the same question and said, we did a factor analysis and put it all together. I was like, I don't get it. I was getting frustrated by this point because it's how many pages? There's a lot of pages I read at this point. And so maybe I'm being a little unfair or a little bit cranky or I don't got the Christmas spirit. I need some more spinach and pumpernickel dip. I don't know, but that's where I'm at.
So I'm really glad you guys went first because you did exactly what I thought you would do, right? You talked about the data and Cronbach and Bofferoni's ideas and such.
Well,
which is
Lara,
great.
that's good. It actually
is good.
It is combining, the multicultural approach to statistics, right? We've got Cronbach and Bofferoni in the same sentence.
I thought that was a misspeak on purpose. I thought you were doing a Dickensian stats mind meld because you said
maybe a Dickensian?
Ferronian.
Dickensian, please.
Ferronian.
Ferronian. So, but part of the reason I was really glad to hear you guys do that is because my takeaway from this paper, from the results, was completely different. And that's not really surprising because we come at the world in different ways and we have different training and all those sorts of things. And what my takeaway from these results were, okay, so if the students are bored, they will be on their phones. And so my therefore statement for that is then don't tell them not to be on their phones. Be sufficiently interesting that they don't want to be on their phones, period. Yeah. That to me is the walk away moment, mic drop for this paper. Yeah. Be more interesting. They'll want to pay attention and
be interactive.
That works.
But it's interesting because I got the feeling they were saying students are afraid they're going to be bored and concerned they're going to be bored, and that's why they're on the phone, as opposed to students are bored and therefore they're on the phone. So the authors actually conclude with some things that I found a bit irritating, and I'm going to emphasize the words that I found irritating. This study represents an innovative approach to applying a behavioral framework to understand beliefs regarding MM and the interplay between those beliefs, course factors, and MM behaviors. Given the links between MM and impaired learning, encouraging students to reduce this behavior may be beneficial. The theory suggests examination of cognitive predictors of a behavior before designing a behavior change intervention. For example, interventions targeted at reducing expectations of boredom by increasing engagement may be most effective. So what I wanted to do, I thought that it goes back to what one of you said a bit earlier about the wording of this is the first paper to do this and that and the other. Let's go back to the idea of theory. Theory is a lens through which one can see a phenomenon, if I understand you correctly, Lara. And a theoretical framework is how the theory is used in the study. So let me ask you all, the authors use the term theory and theory-based, and they talk about theory-driven throughout this paper, including the title. So did our authors actually appropriately use theory? This time I will start with you, Lara, John, Jason.
Thanks, Linda. And I think it depends on how you can use theory as a lens in many different places and in many different ways in a manuscript. And you can use theory to inform your entire design. Or as these authors did, I don't know. I struggled enough with the methods that I'm not sure that this is what they did. But what I think they did is they introduced the theory as a means for analyzing the findings, that they shape their interpretations, not necessarily. Now, they said, though, the questions were part of the study design. So I don't really, I say I'm not sure, and then I hand off.
Okay, so if I were to say on the scale of 1 to 5, did they use theory? You wouldn't
Love
like
it.
that.
A new scale for theory. Now I can get behind this. This is like my Christmas wish came true.
Oh, can we validate it, please? Let's validate it quickly.
Please.
Done. Validated. I actually think they, quote, used theory. I don't think that saved their logic.
They definitely use theory. They had a theory that helped them organize how they were going to do their survey. They had a theory that they tried to organize their results around. So they did it. We can argue about the appropriateness of the theory. I think it's appropriate. But my criticism of this paper is not the use of theory. My criticism is, I'm not sure I can stand behind their methods.
All right. So I'm just wondering whether in the future then we should ask ourselves the
Don't
question.
say.
No,
Oh,
it's
what were
not
you gonna
got
say?
to do with a validated scale. Don't worry.
Yeah,
Thank
we should
you.
use that new scale. We should have 3 scales. That's a great idea, Lara.
We'd have a
That's
baguette at one
fantastic.
end. We had a very pale baguette at one end and lovely dark pumpernickel at the other end of the scale.
The 4th scale. Yeah, the bread scale. Like it,
Yeah.
they compare it to bread.
And we can figure out what that acronym means, bread. My question was simply going to be, do we ask a question at the end of each of our podcasts? Did the authors use a theory, and if so, was it appropriately used, and how?
Great idea, Lara.
No.
Wait a
So
minute.
I'm going to suggest that we don't need that because you can do research without theory, and that's really good too. Like there
Amen.
is
Preach.
there. Really, you and I are agreeing on this. Oh no, actually, yeah, I can see you. Okay, we can discuss that later. We've already been talking a long time. Should we move on to just saying
Yes,
goodbye,
this is a
and we
long
can skip
episode.
all the voting? We'll just skip it all.
All right. Okay, let's do our validated scale of voting. First, we're going to look at methods. I'll go Jason, John, Lara.
You know, I'm so sorry. I'm going to blame the virus in my sinuses, but this is, other than their, nearly attaining convoluted paper of the year, this is a 1. Like this, the methods just completely lost me in their logic.
I think that's a little harsh. I'm going to give it a 2. I've kind of articulated the rationale already, so I don't want to return to that. It feels like a lot of work when in fact what you do is you input all your data and push go on SPSS and bam, there you have it. They didn't do the hard work of saying, what are the questions we actually want to know and articulate a line of reasoning or logic argument for us to follow well there.
So this is not going to make me popular with my colleagues here, but I need to pass. If this paper was sent to me as a reviewer, I would have to say I can't make assessments or adjudication on the methods because I don't understand the intricacies well enough, and there's no explanation
That's never
provided
stopped
to
us all
put meats around
before.
it.
There's a lot of things I don't understand that I'm happy to espouse on.
Yeah, but you're an ER doc, so that
Exactly.
goes without
Yeah,
saying.
so true.
Yeah. So I've got to say it gets a low mark from me. It doesn't get a 1, it gets a 2 because I thought that they tried to use their theory in developing their survey. But after that, it was the analysis part of the methods where it all fell apart. So
It was the choice of using a survey where it fell apart. Like this lends itself well to,
Focus
some
groups or
qualitative approach.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like what's this
exactly.
phenomenon, this social phenomenon?
Could have been a fun focus group. Imagine
yeah, exactly.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they'd all be
How
on their
many of
phones.
you
the
are
trouble is
jonesing
they'd
right
be on
now
their
for
phones,
Candy Crush?
right?
Yeah, exactly. They'd be on their
Right,
phones
right
during the
now, how
focus group.
desperate are you to get on your phone?
Okay, how about the education usefulness of this? We'll go Jason, John, Lara.
I've never given a 0. But this is really close. Yeah, I would bring it out for my new hashtag convoluted paper of the year. So it gets a 1 from me.
I don't know. It's the season of giving, so I'll give it 1 more than that. So I can give it a 2. I think the punchline is we are trying to use our devices a lot, which might be a marker of who knows what the marker is. Engagement, attention, all the nefarious things that Alphabet, et cetera, are doing to bolster our dopamine needs. It feels to me like we're in the current age of like the marshmallow study. You know, that study where you put a marshmallow on a desk and you ask a 3-year-old, Don't eat the marshmallow.
Nope, not to eat the marshmallow.
And if you do eat the marshmallow, that's it. But if you don't, then you get 2 marshmallows 10 minutes later. And we're asking the same thing of our students because we're using a technology which is me meandering through my notes at the front of 200 students, waiting to make a point where everybody's used to, hey, hit me with the punchline in a very provocative soundtrack kind of way. And we're saying, hey, how dare you look at something else? So I think this paper allows me to say, hey, there's some data that says we have some problems in the way we design our current instructional methods. But beyond that, all the other stuff there, I can't trust the analysis, so I'm not sure if I can trust the conclusion.
So I'm going to give this paper a 2, and it's a solid 2, because we all have moments when we have to do teacher evaluations. And sometimes there are teachers who need to hear, if you don't plug in with them, with the learners and engage and make it interesting, they're going to bail. And here's some data proof it wrong. Like if I need to say to someone, I'm sorry, but this really is, if they're bored, they're on their phones, here's the findings, off we go. Let's try to do something.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, Lara, but I don't want to say the punchline is teachers do better. There's a cultural and contextual thing with the way technology is being developed right now. It's not our fault. Like
I don't want to say it's okay. No, you're right.
I had to take Twitter off my phone because I found myself at night just scrolling and scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling. So I like to think that I have a bit of self-actualization and a bit of impulse control. Apparently I don't. And so it's not just teacher phenomenon. It's a new brave new world.
Okay, I think you're right. I don't want to say that it's you're right that it shouldn't be one person's fault, but I do think that if we rely on ways of teaching, if we go back to there's a reason lectures don't work. If we don't take advantage of all of the different affordances we have, we can use your phone for the poll anywhere, or for Kahoot, or all kinds of interactive ways of engaging your learners. Let's work on that. Let's take advantage of the tool that every student has in their hands.
Well, I'll just say, agree with above all of those. I was torn between a 2 and a 3. I think it's an important phenomenon. And the reason I might go a bit higher than you was I was actually heartened by the one part of the results that I think we probably can trust a little bit more, and that's the link or lack of a link between academic performance and multitasking. So that if in fact it doesn't make a difference, then I'd say, why are we worried about it? Having said that, I will end this by inviting all of our listeners to write us at
I'm going to jump in
podcast,
as per usual. So you can write us on the email using your phone at thepaperspodcast@gmail.com, or find us on the internets, paperspodcast.com.
Yeah, this is too confusing.
So funny.
It's not. We're intelligent people. We should be able to do it.
I'm going to have to sort of put something up on the top of my screen.
That's what we should be able to do.
Anyway, so thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another wonderful podcast, but not as good as this one.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
And they faded out. You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.